Welcome to the Miller Report. Today's guest is an attorney in New York City and a managing member of the law firm Eiseman Levine. He is a significant fundraiser for the Republican Party with an emphasis on the United States Senate. Eric, you're looking at me like I said the name wrong of the law firm.
No, it's actually the full name is Eiseman, Levine, Lehrer, Helpton, Kakianis.
I took a shortcut.
But it's
Since October 7th, he is speaking out about anti-Semitism in the United States. So I want to welcome Eric Levine to the Miller Report. Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. And sorry I didn't say the full name of the law firm.
Well,
I took a shortcut.
Lehrer, Helpton, Kakianis, you should apologize to. You said my name, so it was okay.
Okay, good. So let's just start with the number one thing we talked about before we started this, the death of Sinwar. Do you think there's any chance for peace now? Like, what is your take on that? And, go Israel. What do you think?
Well, it depends on your definition of peace. If you want to have some sort of ceasefire, cessation of hostilities, if that's your definition, perhaps. But the truth of the matter is there's not going to be any real peace. The cycle of violence is not going to stop until you have regime change in Iran. That ultimately is what has to happen if you want to bring peace to the region. Hamas operates because Iran funds it and trains them and arms them. Hezbollah operates because Iran funds them, trains them, and arms them. The Houthis operate because Iran funds them, trains them, and arms them. The terrorist proxies in Iraq and Syria operate because the Iranians and the IRGC fund them, trains them, and arms them. So if you say, does the death of Sinwar give us an opportunity for peace, it all really depends upon your definition. I think that's the wrong question. I think the right question is, what do we need to do for Israel to win? It's all about an Israeli victory. The Biden administration in many ways has been quite supportive, but in many ways it has adopted this concept of de-escalation, which is the 21st century term for appeasement. Appeasement failed in the 20th century. It is failing in the 21st century. All that de-escalation has gotten us is that Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon. Iran is wealthier because this administration will not enforce its oil sanctions and secondary sanctions on countries like China that buy cheap oil, which Iran then uses to fund its hegemonic goals in the Middle East, to fund Hamas, to fund Hezbollah, to fund the Houthis, to fund terrorist proxies in Iraq and Syria. And let's keep in mind that since October 7th, there have been roughly 200 terrorist attacks against American service members in Iraq and Syria by Iranians directly or by Iranian proxies, to which we have not responded in any meaningful way. The message that sends is continue to attack, continue to be aggressive. Because if we're not going to defend our own service members, why does anyone think we're going to defend Israel? And that kind of gets to another definition. Both President Biden and Vice President Harris always use this term, we recognize Israel's right to defend itself. Well, what does that mean? All that means in reality is how it's practiced is that if a bomb is about to fall on you, it's okay to shoot it out of the sky.
You don't go into Rafah.
Well, we can get to that, but it's when the Israelis take the offensive. That's the bridge too far. That's what the Israelis are not allowed to do. That is what a Jew is not allowed to do. They're not allowed to retaliate. They're not allowed to make sure it never happens again. So you can have a ceasefire now, a cessation of hostilities now, but all you will have succeeded in doing is delaying so that Hamas or Hezbollah, the Houthis or Iran can regroup, and you'll just have another October 7th. I mean, keep in mind, Biden has been wrong every step of the way.
So, Eric, I got to take a breath. It's just so much, and it's so interesting. And yes, this little country is fighting 6 different wars at the same time.
There's 7 fronts.
7 wars at the same time, and they're doing the best that they can. And oh my goodness, those soldiers, like we talked about, they don't even get a chance to change their boots. They are fighting for Western freedom. I get that, but we can't continue with this bad PR. There's got to be an end somewhere. Do you think a 2-state solution is at all possible, and do you see that happening?
No. Let's keep in mind, in 1947, the UN passed a UN resolution that created a Jewish state and an Arab state. And that was the end of British occupation in the Middle East. The Jews said yes. The Arabs said no. And in 1948, when Israel was established, 5 Arab countries attacked Israel in an attempt to destroy it, and that is what created the refugee problem that we see today. In 2000, President Clinton negotiated or attempted to negotiate a two-state solution between Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat. The Jews said yes, and Arafat said no. And very famously, when as the meeting was unwinding and Arafat was about to leave Camp David, Arafat turns to President Clinton and says, "Mr. Clinton, you're a great man." And Clinton turned to Arafat and he said, "No, I'm a failure, and you made me one." So Clinton is very clear that the Jews said yes, the Arabs said no, and then what did Arafat do? He launched the Second Intifada. In 2005, Ariel Sharon unilaterally decided we are withdrawing from Gaza. There has not been a Jew in Gaza since 2005. The IDF actually went in and removed Israeli citizens living in Gaza. And this notion about an occupation, there's been no Jew in Gaza since 2005. There's been no occupation of Gaza until October 7th, when they were forced to go back in. In 2008, George W. Bush was on the verge of negotiating a better deal than the one that Barak had gotten with Ehud Olmert and Mahmoud Abbas, Yasser Arafat's successor in the Palestinian Authority. Once again, the Jews said yes, and the Arabs said no.
Look, okay, but that was then, and now they're going to be in a World War III. Is there a possibility to have any truce with Iran? I mean, Iran is the head of the snake. We know that, but we know that this has always been an issue. It's 3,000 years, but we're going to be either in a World War III or some truce. Is this possible?
Truce between whom?
Iran.
Iran
and Israel.
No. Iran can only exist. The current regime can only exist if part of its essence, and can only exist so long as it needs to destroy Israel. If they were to ever remove that.
So what's your solution, Eric?
Regime change in Iran.
And how do you do that?
And it does not require boots on the ground.
How do you do it?
Between Israel, the United States, hopefully our NATO allies, we need to remove the infrastructure that this regime uses to oppress its own people. Let's remember, in 2009, when Obama became president, the Iranian people took to the streets and started chanting, "Obama, Obama, are you with us or are you with the Nazis? Are you with us or are you with the Ayatollahs?" And Obama remained silent and allowed them to be bludgeoned in the streets. Why? Because we now know it was part of the appeasement policy to get a JCPOA, to get a nuclear deal. In 2015, when they signed the nuclear deal, the Iranian regime was economically a basket case. It was on the verge of collapse, and Obama saved it with $120 billion of sanctions relief and hostage payments. In 2020, after Trump had successfully implemented the maximum strategy policy, bankrupting Iran, making it impossible to fund Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, and the economy was on the verge of collapse, and people were taking to the streets in opposition to the regime. Remember, women were being clubbed to death in the street because they wouldn't wear their head coverings properly. This is an extraordinarily unpopular regime. If the United States were to put some F-35s in the air, and along with the Israelis, and fly it over Saudi
Yeah, but it's not that simple, Eric. You're going to then have Russia come in. You're going to have China come in. You're going to have all this.
The idea that the Russians, who can barely beat the Ukrainians, or the Chinese, who are so focused on Taiwan, are going to militarily interfere and defend Iran, I would suggest is beyond.
I hope you're right.
But to your original question, can there be a two-state solution? Here's the ultimate reason why there can't be a two-state solution. Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution. Hezbollah doesn't want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution. Iran doesn't want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution. The Palestinian Authority has repeatedly refused a two-state solution.
What about the Palestinian people?
The unfortunate fact is that the Palestinian people overwhelmingly support Hamas. That is just an unfortunate fact. This is a generational issue. Part of what has to happen in the day after in Gaza isn't just that Israel leaves and everyone is happy. Israel has to stay and be responsible for the security in Gaza. They can't leave the Philadelphia corridor because we know that the Egyptians will just allow it to be all these weapons to come in. That's where they came from. We've seen in Lebanon, Resolution 1701, which required UNIFIL to push the Hezbollah north of the Litani River. All they did was defend and protect Hezbollah as they filled it. So this is generational. The Israelis are going to have to be responsible for the security in Gaza, but the Arab states have a very important role here, whether it's the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. They have to start educating the children about math and science and literature and take out of the schools, this is how you kill Jews. When that happens, and that's going to take time.
Yeah, like centuries.
No, it won't take centuries. There's a possibility that this can happen. But the Americans, we have a different concept of time than countries like Iran or Israel or Egypt, which have been around for thousands and thousands of years. We like immediacy, but we have to change that mindset. Some problems don't have solutions, and you just have to make the best of it. And some solutions take years, and I think that's where we are.
So let's move on to the United States. Where is this anti-Semitism coming from? How did it rise so fast after October 7th? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's been here. I think October 7th just blew the lid off of it. And I think a lot of this goes back to the Iran nuclear deal, because it basically, when Obama put that in place, he made very clear that he was shifting the American foreign policy from an Israel-centric Middle East to either a bipolar Middle East, Iran and Israel, and where he famously said these two countries are just these neighbors are just going to have to.
So you think it was always here?
Oh yeah, it absolutely has always been here. But part of the problem is these professors and administrators, they are Jew haters in many of these places. You look at Columbia. I mean,
who's paying for them?
Well, a lot of it. I mean, how much money does Columbia get from the United States government every year? Billions of dollars. And of course, you have a funding from Qatar's been pouring in billions of dollars. Saudi Arabia used to do it, but I think it's much less. But I think it's primarily Qatar that's been pouring this money in. But they're teaching anti-Semitism there. And this isn't a free speech issue. They're free to say whatever they want. We all know from the Constitution and the Supreme Court, you could say whatever you want, but it's okay to put in reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. If you were to say put any ethnic group or any religious group or any gender group at the end of each of these sentences rather than Jew, they'd all be shut down. If you think,
imagine if what happened with George Floyd happened with the Jews. I mean, well, I get it, but as an attorney, where do you draw the line between hate speech and free speech?
Well, hate speech, I mean, free speech obviously is protected. And if they want to stand up and say from the river to the sea, exterminate the Jews, we shoot laser beams from the sky, we're responsible for all the evils in the world, okay, that's fine. But if you start putting up encampments and you start taking away a Jewish student's right to be able to walk across the quad or to be able to safely go to class or to feel threatened, that crosses the line. And what these schools need to do is to enforce their own rules. Because if they enforce their own rules, these things wouldn't happen. It's just because the Jews are the target that this is allowed. If you think if a bunch of white boys got together and decided they were going to form a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan at Columbia and set up a tent city on the quad and started chanting, "Hang the blacks."
Or the Italians.
Or the Italians. How long do you think that tent city would last? They would be appropriately expelled. Those 10 cities would come down, and they would not be tolerated. It's the mere fact that it's the Jews. All of a sudden, it's a free speech issue.
Here we go again.
It is not a free speech issue.
Maybe I don't want to be so chosen.
Well, as Tevye said, sometimes you can choose somebody else, right?
Sometimes. So let's talk about the election coming up in a week. Big topic. What do you think the chances are that the Republicans take over the presidency, Senate, and House?
I think it's getting better and better every day. If you had asked me 2 weeks ago who was going to win the White House, I said, come on, it's Kamala Harris. But over the last 2 weeks, there's a direct correlation between her putting herself out there and being interviewed and people listening to her and the fact that I think the polls are showing that she is tanking and Trump is ascendant. She really isn't incompetent. I mean, and the more you listen to her, the more you come to the conclusion that she's an incompetent. She has nothing substantive to say. And to the extent she has any solutions on the economy, it's socialism. It's crazy. These price controls, they failed in the Soviet Union. They failed in Cuba. They're going to fail here. Price gouging is the reason that prices are high. I still haven't heard what company has been price gouging. But so her solutions are crazy. So I think Trump is going to win. In terms of the Senate, if I had a ranch, I would bet it that the Republicans will retake the Senate. Wow. The question is whether it will be 51 seats, 52 seats, 53 seats, or 54 seats. Because we're winning West Virginia no matter what. Tim Sheehy's going to win in Montana. That's 51. I think it's likely that it's looking more and more likely that Marino is going to win in Ohio. It's looking more and more likely that McCormick is going to win in Pennsylvania.
What about the House?
And if Trump wins in Michigan, I think Rogers is going to Michigan. In the House, I think the best thing look, everybody should know Mike Johnson is a spectacular leader.
I think everybody agrees.
He is spectacular.
On both sides. Yeah. I think everybody agrees.
He is a man of moral clarity.
Yes.
And he has conviction, and he is prepared to stand up for what he believes. He stands up to the fringe of the Republican Party to make sure the government doesn't shut down. He stood up to the fringe of the Republican Party to make sure Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific were funded. And he went to Colombia. When Chuck Schumer went into the Witness Protection Program, Speaker Johnson went to Colombia and said this garbage has to stop. And I think that kind of conviction is going to be rewarded. And the way that the districts are drawn, going to pick up a few extra seats in North Carolina. I think we're going to hold our own in New York. My prediction is that we'll pick up between 3 and 5 seats in the House. So I think there's a real possibility, to your point, that Republicans can win the House, the Senate, and the White House.
I thought that if I did some research on you, and you really were backing Haley.
I was. Well,
you were backing Haley.
Well, first I was backing Tim Scott.
Yeah, so I saw that.
Haley,
so
yeah.
When did the switch come? When did this love affair come?
What love affair?
For Trump. And
I wouldn't call it a love affair.
Well, I want to know, because I'm asking you this, Eric, because I think a lot of my listeners are really looking at what's happening in Israel and Ukraine. And it's coming down to the wire now between those two candidates of who's going to be better for Israel. Every time I turn on the news, it's like all of a sudden they want the Jewish vote. Well, so who's better for Israel, in your opinion?
Well, it's a binary choice. Look, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. And I would suggest that people ask the slightly different question. I would say, what's better for America? And as it pertains to Israel, the United States national security depends in large part on the success of its allies. Israel is our closest ally in the region, if not in the world. If Israel wins, we win.
They're doing our fight.
They're doing our fight. Israel's enemies are our enemies. Israel is the tip of the spear. Israel is fighting for Western civilization, and they're fighting for our national security. So I would argue what's in America's best interest, and what's in America's best interest is a successful Israel that wins the war, and they defeat our enemies. And who's our enemy there? Our enemy is Iran, and we need to start treating them like an enemy. They've been at war with us since the inception of that regime in 1979, when they took 44 hostages for 444 days. And they've been at war with us ever since, where they blew up the Marines in the Marine barracks during the Reagan years, killing 240 Marines, when they blew up Khobar Towers and killing Americans, when they blew up the American embassy as they attack Americans in Iraq and Syria. They are our enemy. And we need to support Israel, not for Israel, but for America. The benefit, of course, is that Israel shares our values. And as an American Jew, I would be a fool to believe that my place here in America is not impacted by a safe and secure Israel. I mean, people should remember, Israel doesn't exist because the Holocaust occurred, or that it has a right to exist because of the Holocaust. The Holocaust happened because Israel didn't exist.
Exactly.
And Zionism, for all the nonsense that's put out there by the Jew haters, Zionism is a very simple concept. It's that the Jews as a nation, like any other nation on earth, are entitled to their own state. And that's what Israel is, and that's what Zionism is. It's no more, it's no less. Jews are entitled to their own state. And Israel is that state. There's one Jewish state. There are 29 Arab states. There are over 50 states that have a majority Muslim population. And yet, Israel, as it defends itself, is the victim of not just military attacks in the Middle East, but in the United Nations. Gutierrez, the General Secretary of the United Nations, is an utter disgrace. He's an anti-Semite. And it just speaks to how useless the United Nations is. And we need to really rethink, our funding of it and our support of it. But coming back to your original question about Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, remember, Kamala Harris brags about the fact she's the last person in the room. So the catastrophic surrender in Afghanistan, you can draw a direct line from that to the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. The Biden administration wanted to get back to the appeasement of Iran. You can draw a direct line from that to October 7th. And she is watching, the president of China, and when they are allowed to fly balloons from Alaska over the continental United States, which just so happens the wind blows it over every military base along the way, and then they finally shoot it out of the sky over South Carolina, we are projecting weakness around the world. And when you project weakness around the world, you get war. So you're concerned about World War III. The best way to avoid a war is to be so strong militarily and persuade your enemies that you're willing to, it's a credible use of that force, that they would be afraid to ever even start a war.
And you think Donald Trump is that answer?
I certainly think he's much more likely than Kamala Harris, who's in the appeasement surrender mode. I mean, remember, Kamala Harris comes from the biggest difference between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is that Joe Biden, I think, was kind of from the moderate wing of the party. That's kind of why they nominated him. But he recognized that the progressive wing of the party was ascendant, and he's been attempting to appease them ever since he became president. Kamala Harris is from that wing of the party. You don't have to appease it. She is from that wing of the party. And that wing of the party views America as systemically racist and evil. And when you project power abroad, you're projecting American evilness abroad. So bring them home. So that projects weakness, and that gets war.
And do you think choosing Vance was his best choice? J.D.
Vance is more of a populist than I am. He's more of an isolationist than I am. I think
that's a big concern. Even with Trump.
Look, the isolationist
make America great.
The isolationist wing of the Republican Party is a real danger.
Yes.
And it's an open question as to whether or not J.D. Vance is in that wing of the party, because he has been.
And Trump could get shot.
Because he's been quite supportive of Israel,
right.
I have to say. And I think he has distinguished himself so far on the campaign trail. So let's leave it. It's an open question. I'm hopeful that he'll prove me wrong. But either Tim Scott or Nikki Haley would have been my first choice for vice president. Obviously, I supported them for president. But as I said, I think Vance has been quite good on the campaign trail. He's been a strong supporter of Israel. And, people grow into the role, and I'm hopeful that he'll grow into the role.
Last question. Are you concerned about any violence next week?
Yes.
What are you thinking?
This notion that only the right is violent. I mean, you just have to look at the BLM riots, after George Floyd was killed today.
Oh, yeah. All those stores being killed.
And Antifa attacking courthouses in Washington, in Seattle. Was it Seattle or Portland? I don't remember, but one of those two cities. And everybody talks about Trump's, they keep touting this notion that Trump's this threat to democracy, and he's like Hitler and he's a Nazi. You say that enough, people get afraid. And if he wins, and I think he will, I think there's a real chance for violence. But here's the question I would like to ask.
So you're saying from the left side there'll be violence?
Yes, from the left, because I think Trump's going to win. But here's the question I would like to ask. Both Richard Nixon and Al Gore have the distinction of being vice presidents and certifying elections that they lost. If Kamala Harris loses, I would like her to commit today. I'd like to hear her say, I will certify that election.
And what about if she wins? Do you think there'll be violence?
That's certainly a concern. I mean, January 6th showed that that's certainly very possible. And I've been on the record repeatedly. January 6th was not a legitimate form of protest. And I was disappointed in Trump's response to it. So there is that danger. I mean, the real problem is both the extreme left and the extreme right are attacking our institutions, and when you keep tearing at the institutions, it becomes a problem. And we really need the center to hold. But I always fall back on this to give me great comfort. In 1860 to 1864, the country had a civil war. Over 600,000 Americans died, more than all wars combined, and we survived it. We're not there. We'll survive this too.
Well, I hope you're right, and thank you so much for your thoughts and all your insight, and I hope that Israel prevails. Being a daughter of a Holocaust survivor,
Yisrael
I see
Chai.
this. If there was in Israel, there would be no Holocaust, and my parents would have not lost all their siblings and parents. So thank you for coming on the Miller Report.
My pleasure. Thank you.